And while we're never going to get quite there with NBA stuff where like a player 6 months out is going to be like, I want to go trade. Like, we're not going to get that because the NBA doesn't like allow for such public messiness. I mean, they just fined PJ Tucker like $75,000 for saying he was trying to get traded. We're, I think, heading to this place, and Howard Beck wrote a piece of The Ringer that is the other part of the inspiration of this, basically just saying that the scuttlebutt around the league is that like there's a lot of potential movement in the summer. There's a lot of names you're hearing that might want to move, that teams might want to move, that there's all your salary considerations and not quite like financial fair play, but the salary cap is sort of and the aprons are sort of functioning as like a cost control mechanism for a lot of situations. I think, Brendon, for a certain level of guy, and it's probably top 40-ish, top 30-ish, I think we're just done with free agency. I think it's done. I think free agency is at a point now where like guys are going to start privately signaling, I want to go here or I want to go, and then it becomes bidding wars. I think we saw this with Mitchell already. Maybe it happens again with him if he truly doesn't want to stay in Cleveland. And you're going to learn, and I think you're going to see like these battles between teams that are saying like we're giving you the chance to win. There's only so many places we can really move you. There's only so many places up the food chain we can move you, which is another similarity to this. There's only so many spots when you keep moving things up the food chain. There's not the mechanisms to form like super teams at the same way you can in Europe and with certain teams, aka Man City. But I think we're heading to a place where like you're just going to start seeing Real Madrid. You're going to start seeing teams and players trying to move things in a certain direction where, like, if you're at a certain level, you just no longer do free agency. You just get traded and moved on in that way. And LeBron is very much kind of part of that in his own weird way, but it feels like the way that we're going to see guys move now is no longer July 9th, Kevin Durant is meeting with teams. It's going to be like back channel deals and he's getting traded for 3 firsts and whatever. Like, I think we're kind of done with in the open free agency for a certain class of guy.
So I want to flesh this out because you threw a version of this at me kind of more related to Mitchell via text a bit ago, and I threw
Mitchell's
back
probably
at
the
you
best
then.
example.
Yeah, well, I think Kevin Durant's the best example.
Okay, hit me.
Well, I just think it already happened. I mean, he signed an extension and it hadn't kicked in, and he asked for a trade. He's mentioned in Howard Beck's piece, quite unfairly, in my personal opinion. All respect to Mr. Beck, but Durant for sure looks around. He always has a wandering eye. Is pretty, drive-by shooting of a quote there. But like this, the thing I want to flesh out is like when you and I did our first series of shows, I think one of the first big picture things we hyped or nerded out about after the Durant deal and everything else last February was that this is a trades and extensions league.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess now that we're another offseason and another deadline after that, and we're starting to see a little bit of what's going to be happening in this upcoming offseason, I'm curious what you think is different now than what we would have said last February. Because we were saying that free agency is dead. The biggest guy to move was Fred VanVleet last July. So I'm curious looking forward what you think. What's the next thing we're going to be saying? And that's, I think, what Howard was kind of trying to flesh out in his piece, but I don't know the answer to that.
I think there's two things, at least as far as I can guess at it. Number one, I think the money part of it is just going to make things weird for a little bit. Brendon, I think at some point we're going to get a course correction on every single star player of a certain level, just like getting the maximum amount of money they can, because I don't think that's actually going to be tenable for teams to actually build rosters at a certain point.
Yeah. Somebody's going to get told no.
Someone who is good but not quite great is like fringe all-star. He's going to get told no. And a team will be very valid in doing so because they're still going to be paying these players lots of money, right? Like Boston could have done it with Jaylen Brown, and I would have understood it. And that to me is the kind of level. The second part of it is that it just feels like this summer is going to have a lot of names that we need to consider as being on the move, and like it's going to feel splashy in that way. Zion, Trae Young, do the Pelicans pick between Zion and Ingram, Mitchell, and like Mitchell to me, and I'm close to that one obviously because I cover him here, but in Cleveland, but he is someone where like the Cavs could be very willing to be in a position to make a really great case that is like the best basketball place for him, and it still might not be enough. And like that is in itself another weird thing to say. If he's like, yeah, I want to play. I really just want to play for the Knicks. That's all I really want to do. Or I do just want to be in a big market. Like that's understandable. That's a human thing for a guy that I think has been in, from college to Utah to Cleveland, has never been in like the biggest stage and wasn't a top 10 pick or anything, and kind of had to grind his way to being where he's at now, and maybe just wants to be in the brighter spotlight. But I think we're just heading towards a summer where we're going to just get a lot of movement that feels like a frenzy. And then I want to see if that becomes just like a thing that happens every year. Do we start seeing just like more like big salary player swaps for the sake of shaking things up all the time? Do we just start like what is this? What is the ripple effect beyond what I think feels like a first wave of a summer where you're just going to get a lot of movement? Like, what do the Wolves do with Towns and their financial situation?
Well,
there's so many.
Example, right? Because it's not just that the salaries are rising and all that stuff, but it's also I think maybe we already are, but we're definitely going to in the summer really get an idea of what the new CBA is going to change, right? Like, I think this first year of it, because it's sort of an ease in where the rules ripple into place. Like, I don't know if people realize how aggressive this stuff is going to be. I cover the Suns, the picture perfect, example, poster child for what these punishments do. This deadline, when the Suns just acquired Royce O'Neal, not even a big player, who cares? They intentionally assembled a bunch of minimum players because that is the last time for the foreseeable future that they will even be able to combine salaries together. Half a dozen teams in the NBA, the Clippers, the Suns, the Warriors, the Bucks, a couple more, literally will not even be able to say we are trading 2 players for 1 player. Not allowed anymore. Yeah. If you're over the second apron. You have to take back 100% or less of the money of the 1 player you're even trading. Like, all these little things are going to start to happen, and so that's going to be limiting. I think that would be a case against so much movement among the very, very, very top teams. But at the same time, I think we will also see teams trying to get out from underneath of that, teams trying to avoid the second apron altogether. And so I don't know what that necessarily means for free agency. Obviously, there's these additional exceptions that have been created. There is some differences in terms of what the league seemed to hope would, or the union, I don't know, seemed to hope would help out kind of the middle guy. I don't really know if that's all going to happen, but that was a big talking point coming off of the last CBA. But I think whether it's in free agency or not, that is also going to grease the wheels for more movement one way or another. So again, I don't know what those deals will look like. You can't just get worse. Like the Celtics with Jaylen Brown, the Wolves with Cat, the Pelicans with their guys, they're not just going to flip their second best player for like an average young guy and a couple first round picks. But there's just only so many of these players. So because it has to be trades, I guess that's why it's different than like the transfer market with soccer, right? Those guys just go
it's
somewhere.
not 1-to-1. Yeah, it's not 1-to-1.
This has to be like what are you getting back? I think we're going to see some teams really, yes, I think we'll see teams say no to paying guys, but it might be pretty painful to do that.
What I think I mean ultimately by it is like it's obviously not 1-to-1. We're not just going to get like the Phoenix Suns are going to pay the Utah Jazz $40 million for Lauri Markkanen, right? And then like they get Lauri Markkanen. That's not what this is going to be. I think what I mean by it is that like we're just not, free agency is just, as we hit on, it's it's just like going to be rare that anyone of note actually like runs that out. It's guaranteed money for the players, and it's then on the teams to figure stuff out. And that to me is like such a different dynamic than I think we've been used to for 20 years. It's happening now, as you said. I think that's correct. But it's like shifting the dynamic. Like the decision, like I don't think something like the decision or Durant meeting with teams in the Hamptons is going to happen anymore.
Yeah, but I think that has, when is the last time a big player moved to teams in free agency was Kawhi Leonard and Kevin Durant 5 years ago. So
yeah,
that's not happening. That hasn't been happening.
Yeah, that's fair. I think there is just something to me in what is going on here that I just can't. Maybe I just can't quite put my finger on it, but there's just something here in the water that I'm fascinated by, the mechanics of all of this, and I don't think we understand. I don't think we know like what is being unleashed. You know, like I don't think we know exactly what is fully going to happen at the end of this. Like this summer is going to be fascinating just for the player movement. It's going to be really fun to see what that looks like. The CBA stuff, as you said, is going to have implications, but then like what does it mean for future? I think there's going to be ripple effects from like this next 12, 24 months on like how business gets done in the league, and that to me is just a fascinating period. I just can't like quite figure out like where we are at with how player movement works anymore. And maybe I think that's where I'm kind of just struggling. I think that's where, for me, Brendon, I just want to like put a name on it and be able to like quantify it in my head, and I think I just don't know if I totally can.
I mean, I like the name that, personally, maybe it's selfish. I gave you a nice name. I've been calling it a Trades and Extensions League for a year on this exact podcast. You could just use that if you really want a name. But
we'll make t-shirts.
I think the last element of it to me is that the bill is coming due for the mega trade picks.
Yeah.
Right? So we heard it with Mikal Bridges and Houston. Trey and the Spurs would be another example of it. But I think that has a real chance to disperse talent to traditionally small market teams in a way that we have never seen, because they just frankly have the goods, Some of the teams that have the goods are in big markets, like the Nets with the Suns picks, or depending on what you think of Houston, they gave stuff and got stuff at various points. Same with Brooklyn. But the biggest trade possibility teams are in Salt Lake City and Oklahoma City. So what happens if they swoop in and trade for a player on a long contract? And I think that's where you'll start to see the next, version of player empowerment or a version of the decision and things like that is what happens when, let's just use the example, even though I don't like it. Let's say Durant's wandering eyes come up this summer. I don't think it's going to happen. And he loves the idea of, let's say he wants to go back to the Warriors. Big market, wants to go back, whatever. But the Thunder give the Suns an offer they can't refuse. It's one thing to like flex your muscles to get out of a situation, demand a trade away from your team, flex your muscles to, let's say, take less money or a less favorable contract from a free agency place you want to go than what your other team could offer you, whatever it is. What happens when we have a really big blow up between a player under contract for his team and a place that he ideally would like to be? I mean, that's kind of what happened with Durant and the Nets when he wanted to go to the Suns the first time, but he just sort of packed it up and said never mind, because he's not the type of dude to really cause a scene like that. But somebody will. If somebody's made a public mess and demanded a trade already, and it gets uglier than Lillard or Durant wanted to make it because they don't want to go to the Thunder or the Jazz or the Rockets, I think that could be a really big, interesting ripple in all of this that we haven't really seen yet in this new era, where being an empowered player doesn't mean the same thing as it used to be when you're always under a long-term contract.
Do you also, the last thing I'll ask about this is, do Do you think we can move away from a world where there are shocking, like out of nowhere ass outs, or are we just going to start getting like we hear like Trae Young is the example now, where it's like you start hearing about it in the middle of the season before?
I just think nobody can shut up about NBA trades in 2024. So there's only like
we used to be a country
450 players in the NBA. How many shocking things really would there be? Like, what's the most shocking ask out you could think of right now? Steph?
Yeah, but then Steph is like the one where it's like if you ever asked out, I'd be absolutely floored. You know?
Yeah, because he's accomplished enough that it's like,
you
can win your 5th ring with some random team? Like, what do you need that for?
Logan Murdoch I saw like a clip of him talking to Bill Simmons. I said, bizarre of me.
Yeah, you guys are buddies.
Yeah, I also use wired headphones sometimes when I walk around and like talk to people. So that's we can bond.
I have a more surprising one actually, which is Jokic.
The Jokic one is he's just gonna one day be like, guys, I got a new horse. I'm retired. Like that's what's gonna happen there. I feel like.
I mean, we should be more prepared than we are for this current contract that he's on to be his last one. I don't think it's going to happen, but he's under contract through 2028, at which point he will be like 33, 34.
Yeah.
Just saying. But what were you saying about the Warriors?
He was saying that it's like Logan Murdoch had that point of like he would rather them like those guys would rather go out together and have like a 25% chance of winning a title versus like one of Clay or Draymond gets traded and Steph has a 75%. Like he'd rather try to win it with his guys, which there's something very commendable about that. Whereas I think LeBron, to like bring this full circle, if there's a world where like he can get Bronny to a city that he wants to play in, and Clutch does some clutching, and then he can go somewhere, and even if he makes less money, can go compete for one last title. There's a world where I think that could happen. We'll get in the summer. We'll see where that's going to be, but I still think there's only a couple markets that it really makes sense. There's one I'm selfishly like I would love to see it fully explored. The cap space part of it is the part that makes it like kind of impossible for a lot of these. Philly then just becomes the one where if he wants to make money and have a chance to compete, that's kind of the one. But
that's a perfect example of what we're talking about, right? Because LeBron, it's a player option. He does not have to opt out. He can choose not to opt out and then tell them to trade him. And then where do we go, right? Like so, it is a different era for sure. And I think this summer will be a great example of it. And I think there's going to be a ton of guys that move. Like last summer, really, especially because Lillard didn't get moved. It wasn't that big, and Harden didn't, and everything else. But yeah, maybe this will just come in waves, and maybe 2024 is going to be a big wave where last year was a smaller one.